groups in the general population as of 1920. The principal argument of the restrictionists was that use of the 1890 census was fair to all ethnic groups. This false picture of the 1920s debates was then used by Gould, Kamen, and others to argue that the, quote, overtly racist Immigration Act of 1924, unquote, was passed because of racist bias emanating from the IQ testing community, and that this law was a primary cause of the death of Jews in the Holocaust. Thus, Kamen concluded that, quote, the law for which the science of mental testing may claim substantial credit resulted in the deaths of literally hundreds of thousands of victims of the Nazi biological theorists. The victims were denied admissions to the United States because the German quota was filled, unquote. Kamen's portrayal of early 20th century intelligence testing became received wisdom, appearing repeatedly in newspapers, popular magazines, court decisions, and occasionally even scholarly publications. MacDonald's introduction to Kamen's ideas came from reading a popular textbook on developmental psychology he was using in his teaching. Similarly, Gould proposes a link between hereditary views on IQ and the 1924 U.S. immigration law that restricted immigration from Eastern and Southern Europe and biased immigration in favor of the peoples of Northwestern Europe. The 1924 immigration law is then linked to the Holocaust. Quote, the quotas showed immigrations from Southern and Eastern Europe to a trickle. Throughout the 1930s, Jewish refugees, anticipating the Holocaust, sought to immigrate but were not admitted. The legal quotas and continuing eugenical propaganda barred them even in years when inflated quotas for Western and Northern European nations were not filled. Chase, that's an author, has estimated that the quotas barred up to 6 million Southern, Central, and Eastern Europeans between 1924 and the outbreak of World War II. We know what happened to many who wished to leave but had nowhere to go. The paths to destruction are often indirect, but ideas can be agents as sure as guns and bombs. And that's from Gould, linking to the Holocaust. Indeed, although there is no evidence that IQ testing or eugenic theories had anything more than a trivial influence on the 1924 immigration law, there is evidence that the law was perceived by Jews as directed against them. Moreover, concerns about Jews and their ultimate effect on American society may well have been a motive of some of the Gentiles favoring immigration restriction, including among the intellectuals Madison Grant and Charles Davenport. Because of his desire to counteract the publicity given to the bell curve, Gould reissued The Measure of Man in 1996 with a new introduction in which he states, quote, may I end up next to Judas Iscariot, Brutus, and Cassius in the devil's mouth at the center of hell if I ever fail to present my most honest assessment and best judgment of the evidence for empirical truth. That's Gould in the intro to his book, The Mismeasure of Man. Despite this pledge of scholarly objectivity, Gould took no steps to deal with the objection of his critics. Exactly the type of behavior one expects in a propagandist rather than a scholar. The Snyderman and Herstein article, Samuelson's work, and Degler's book are not cited at all, and Gould does not retract his statement that IQ testing was a prominent feature of the congressional immigration debates of the 1920s. Perhaps most egregiously of all, Gould makes the amazing argument that he will continue to ignore all recent scholarship on IQ in favor of the older classical research because of the transient and ephemeral nature of contemporary scholarship. The argument is that there is no progress in IQ research, but only a reoccurrence of the same bad arguments. A comment that I doubt Gould, that's MacDonald doubts, Gould would apply to any other area of science. Thus, Gould continues to denigrate studies linking brain size with IQ, despite a great deal of contrary research both prior to and especially since his 1981 edition. Using magnetic resonance imaging to get that's MRI, to get a more accurate measure of brain size, modern research thus vindicates the discoveries of 19th century pioneers like Paul Broca, Francis Galton, Samuel George Morton, who are systematically defamed by Gould. However, as Rushton notes, Gould's research cited on the brain size / IQ correlation because of his realization that the contemporary data are unequivocal in their support of a moderate association. Instead, in the 1996 edition, Gould reprints his approval of a 1971 review of the literature that concluded that there was no relationship. Gould's revision thus ignores 25 years of research, including Van Valen's paper on which Jensen's ideas were based. In his revision, Gould also does not discuss an article by J.S. Michael that shows that contrary to Gould's claim, Samuel George Morton did not fudge his data on race differences in skull size, intentionally or otherwise. Moreover, although Morton's research, quote, was conducted with integrity, unquote, it included an error that actually favored a non-Caucasian group, an error that Gould failed to mention, while at the same time Gould himself made systematic errors and used arbitrarily chosen procedures in his calculations. And Gould did so in a manner that favored his own hypotheses that there are no racial differences in cranial capacity. Gould also failed to revise his defamation of H. Goddard, in which he claimed that Goddard had doctored photos of the famous Kalilakak family to make them look mentally retarded and menacing. In his study, Goddard had compared the Kalilakaks, who were the descendants of a tavern maid and an upstanding citizen, with the descendants of the same man and his wife. That's what the study he's referring to. A subsequent study by Glenn and Ellis, appearing well before the revised edition, concluded, however, that these photographs are judged as appearing kind. To put it charitably, Gould's precipitations about the malicious intentions of IQ researchers results in his over-attributing bias to others. Finally, in the 1996 revision, Gould failed to rebut arguments against his claim that general intelligence was nothing more than a statistical artifact. This is noteworthy because in his introduction to the 1996 edition of his book, The Mismeasure of Man, Gould is clearly apologetic about his lack of expertise as a historian of science or as a psychologist, but he does claim to be an expert in factor analysis. His failure to mount a defense against his scholarly critics is therefore another example of his intellectual dishonesty in the service of his ethno-political agenda. As a review of the 1996 edition by Rushton indicates, a great many other errors of commission and omission abound in Mismeasure of Man, all having to do with politically sensitive issues involving racial differences and sex differences in cognitive abilities. Gould also has strongly opposed the idea that there is progress in evolution, quite possibly because of his belief that such ideas among German evolutionists contributed to the rise of National Socialism. As recounted by Lewin, Gould acknowledges an ideological influence on his beliefs, but reiterates his belief that the trends toward greater intelligence and larger brain size are not important in the overall scheme of evolution. However, Gould acknowledges that there is a deeper issue at stake than whether all animal groups show this tendency. At the basis of this perspective is Gould's assertion that humans' consciousness, intelligence, and the general trend toward larger brain size in human evolution are mere accidents and did not contribute to Darwinian fitness or to the solution of adaptive problems in ancestral environments. His perspective is thus meant to be a skirmish in the nature-nurture debate over intelligence. In addition, Dennett's devastating analysis of the rhetorical devices used by Gould in his war against adaptationism leaves little doubt regarding the fundamental intellectual dishonesty of Gould's writing. Dennett implies that a non-scientific agenda motivates Gould, but stops short of attempting to analyze the reasons for this agenda. Gould himself recounts an incident in which the British biologist Arthur Kane, referring to Gould and Lewontin's famous anti-adaptionist paper, The Spandrels of San Marco and the Panglossian Paradigm, a critique of the adaptionist program, accused him of having, quote, betrayed the norms of science and intellectual decency by denying something that we knew to be true, which is adaptationism, because he so disliked the political implications of an argument that is social biology based upon it, unquote. The verdict must be that Gould had indeed forfeited his membership in the, quote, ancient and universal company of scholars, unquote, and will spend his afterlife in the devil's mouth at the center of hell. However, it is noteworthy that despite the widespread belief that Gould has a highly politicized agenda and is dishonest and self-serving as a scholar, the prominent evolutionary biologist John Maynard Smith notes that, quote, he has come to be seen by non-biologists as the preeminent evolutionary theorist. In contrast, the evolutionary biologists with whom MacDonald have discussed his work with tend to see him as a man whose ideas are so confused as to be hardly worth bothering with. All this would not matter were it not that he is giving non-biologists a largely false picture of the state of evolutionary theory. Similarly, Steven Pinker, a prominent linguist, and a major figure in the evolutionary psychology movement, labels Gould's ideas on adaptationism as misguided and uninformed. He also takes Gould to task for failing to properly cite the known work of G.C. Williams and Donald Simmons, in which these authors have proposed non-adaptive explanations for some human behaviors, while nevertheless adopting an adaptionist perspective on human behavior generally. Gould has thus dishonestly taken credit for others' ideas while utilizing them in a wholly inappropriate manner to discredit the adaptionist program generally. In an article entitled Homo Deceptus, Never Trust Stephen Jay Gould, journalist Robert Wright, author of The Moral Animal, makes the same charge in a debate over a flagrantly dishonest interpretation by Gould of the evolutionary psychology of sex differences. Wright notes that Gould has, quote, convinced the public he is not merely a great writer, but a great theorist of evolution. Yet among top-flight evolutionary biologists, Gould is considered a pest, not just a lightweight, but an actively muddled man who has warped the public's misunderstandings of Darwinism, unquote. A false picture perhaps, but one that is not without its usefulness in satisfying political and ethnic agendas. Another prominent biologist, John Alcock, provides an extended and